Welcome to Podiatry Unfiltered. This is the podcast where we skip the sugarcoating and talk honestly about what it takes to survive and thrive as an independent podiatrist today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Podiatry Unfiltered. This is episode 8. And this episode, I just got back from that regenerative medicine conference in Fort Lauderdale by the ACCPS. And I wanted to share, it's kind of a funny story. When the first time I ever encountered a soft wave machine and I didn't make eye contact with the vendor, I was like, that's too expensive. I'm not going to do that. So I have kind of a little story to tell about that because now it's something we use in our practice all the time. But the very first time I was exposed to it, I was not into it because the truth is the first time I saw the soft wave therapy at a conference, I wouldn't even go over to the booth. I mean, I literally avoided eye contact with them. If you've ever been to a medical conference, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You walk through the vendor hall. There are all those booths everywhere, lasers, gadgets, biologicals, supplements, devices, all promising to revolutionize your practice. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, is this actually legitimate? Or is it just another expensive toy that they're trying to sell me? So I see the soft wave booth and I remember thinking to myself, I'm not doing that. There's no way. It was expensive. Nobody really I knew was using it. And honestly, it was always one of those biggest red flags in medicine. Nobody else is doing something. You immediately wonder why. So I did what most doctors do. I totally ignored it and just kept walking. But over time, something started to change in the way I was thinking about medicine and about my practice. Like most podiatrists, a huge percentage of what we treat are chronic conditions. Plantar fasciitis becomes chronic. Achilles tendonitis, arthritis, different tendon injuries, neuropathy. So patients who have been everywhere else, tried everything else before, and they finally walk into your office. And if you've practiced long enough, you start noticing something. A lot of these treatments we use are really about managing symptoms. Orthotics help. Anti-inflammatories help. They don't necessarily solve the problem. And steroid injections help. They don't solve and sometimes can make it worse. Physical therapy absolutely helps. But sometimes they don't actually fix the underlying problem. And when you start seeing enough patients like that, you start asking bigger questions. Is there a better way to actually stimulate healing? Around the same time, we started incorporating some of the newer technologies into our practice. We brought the class 4 running laser and we started working with biologics like DPMX. We started to see improvement and actually really helping patients. When you start going down that path and you start learning about regenerative medicine, you start realizing something very interesting. The science is actually there. The research is there. And the idea isn't crazy at all. The idea is that instead of simply reducing inflammation or masking pain, you're stimulating the body's natural healing responses. So I started reading more. I mean, I read all the time, but I started reading more about soft wave therapy. I looked at the studies. I started understanding the mechanisms of how these acoustic waves work, how they stimulate cellular healing and cellular signaling, and to recruit the stem cells to help the injured tissue. And the more I read, the more it started to make sense. But even then, there's always that moment when you have to decide, because reading about something and investing in something are two very different things. Every doctor listening knows this, and you know that feeling. You're sitting there and you're thinking, is this going to work? Is this going to do something? Is this going to help my patients? Or am I about to make a very expensive mistake? And at some point, you have to stop researching and just make a decision, right? Are you going to keep doing the same old exact thing you've always done? Or are you going to take a chance, something new that might actually move the needle for your patients and for you? So we made the leap. We bought a soft wave. We brought the soft wave into our practice. And I can honestly say that decision changed a lot of things for us. First, from a patient standpoint, just from a patient care standpoint, we start to see patients with chronic plantar fasciitis who tried everything else finally get better. Athletes with tendon injuries who didn't want surgery, didn't want to be in a boot for 8 weeks. Patients with arthritis who just want to keep playing golf, pickleball, tennis, or running. Instead of just managing the symptoms, we're actually seeing healing tissue and functional improvement. Arthritis we're more managing, but all the other stuff. And there's a business side to it too. Let's just be honest with that too. In the last year alone, that technology has generated thousands of dollars of revenue. And that's something I know doctors don't think or doctors don't talk enough about that. But it's okay to build a practice that's both good for patients and financially successful. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, when you build a practice around solutions that actually help people, the business success usually follows. What made me think about this really was a conversation I had this past weekend. I met another podiatrist. He was a really nice guy. He was about 53 years old. And we started talking about regenerative medicine and soft wave therapy. And the second I mentioned it, he said immediately something that sounded so familiar to me. He said, I'm not getting that shit. He said, and honestly, it reminded myself at that conferences years ago when I first would when I looked at that soft wave booth, because skepticism is normal. Doctors are trained to be skeptical. And I think that's part of what makes us good clinicians. But sometimes skepticism can turn into something else. It can turn into resistance to change. And medicine is changing faster than ever right now. Technology is changing. Patient expectations are changing. Their access to information about what's out there. Treatment options are changing. And the doctors who are willing to stay curious, keep learning, and keep evolving are the ones that are going to thrive. Another thing that struck me during this conversation was something I see a lot now. A lot of doctors are constantly talking about side hustles, real estate, crypto, online businesses. And I'm not against any of those things. Sometimes I think doctors are looking outside their practice for opportunities when the biggest opportunity is already there, sitting in front of you. Especially if you're an innovative podiatrist, these things are right there for the grabbing. Your practice can be the opportunity. It can bring you better treatments. It can solve real world problems for patients. If you create services that people are actively looking for, you don't necessarily need some complicated side business. Your practice itself can be an incredible business. For me personally, I still love being a podiatrist. I love being a podiatrist. I generally enjoy treating patients. I love the challenge of figuring out complex problems. And I love building a practice that actually makes a difference in people's lives. So when I look back now, it's kind of funny because the conference booth I refused to walk over to ended up being one of the best decisions I've ever made. It reminds me of something that I think applies to all of us in medicine. Sometimes the opportunities that make the biggest difference in your career are the ones you almost ignored. So as far as again, my big thing is I know lots of times because it's so easy to think, let's compete with all those influencers out there. You got people who literally know nothing about the anatomy of the foot or ankle. And it's very tempting to get out there and change the world with a video. But I think you can change a lot of worlds that are coming in on a daily basis into your office, make them better. The regenerative medicine stuff is out there for the taking. Your patients are absolutely Googling this information. It's not on your website. They're not going to be seen. This is Michelle McGowan, Podiatry Unfiltered. See you next time.